On the show this evening, we'll be diving deep into Prime Minister Narendra Modi's exclusive interview to Business Today, where he talks about his vision for the G20 presidency and the legacy he hopes India will leave behind. This is Prime Minister Modi's only and first interview on the G20. Lots of talking points and action agendas which will give us a sense of what to expect in September when the world descends on Delhi for the big leaders summits. All that and more coming up on the Newstrack.
Countdown to G20 summit. India emerges as voice of Global South. This is India's moment. Days before Global Summit, Prime Minister Modi sets the agenda. Prime Minister speaks exclusively to Business Today. The Narendra Modi interview. Big focus on Newstrack.
It is the biggest interview this year. Prime Minister Narendra Modi sitting for an exclusive conversation with the top editorial team of Business Today. The conversation comes just days before the world's 20 most powerful leaders converge in Delhi to set the economic and political agenda. As president of a group which commands 85% of the world's economy, it is Prime Minister Modi giving us insights into his vision for the Leaders Summit and the legacy he hopes India will leave behind.
Delhi is being beautified. Renovation work is being carried out at a frenetic pace across the city in anticipation of the two-day G20 Global Summit next month. The summit, which will showcase India as an emerging economic superpower, with recent data and reports hailing it as a force to reckon with. And it is the resurgent India which was the centerpiece of the exclusive Business Today interview with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The Prime Minister spoke at length about the impact of India's G20 presidency on the global ecosystem. In a no-holds-barred conversation with the top editorial team of Rahul Kanwal, Siddharth, Zarabi and Sourav Majumdar, the Prime Minister laid out the enabling role India is playing on a range of issues. The big takeaways from the over 40-minute interview is the way G20 has changed under India's leadership. To emerge as the voice of often sidelined Global South, according to the Prime Minister, the summit will bring developed and developing countries together for the first time to find solutions to global problems. The Prime Minister has also pushed for the inclusion of the African Union into the G20, emphasizing that India and India's G20 will act as a catalytic agent for the new global order. And India is combining its G20 presidency with its growing economic clout to make its tryst with history. The task is difficult and fraught with urgent issues that require global attention. Countries across the world are trying to repair the damage from the twin shocks of the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine war. The world is also adjusting to a new normal of slower growth, higher inflation, widening socio-economic disparities, and extreme weather-related events. According to the Prime Minister, the G20 is being looked at as a ray of hope by the world. The ground for this is being laid during India's G20 presidency. The Prime Minister warned that there are forces taking undue advantage by catalyzing the debt crisis and capitalizing on the helplessness of other countries and leading them into debt traps. This is being addressed under India's presidency via debt restructuring and helped countries like Sri Lanka, Zambia, Ethiopia and Ghana. The exclusive interaction at the Prime Minister's sprawling, tastefully done-up office in 7 Lok Kalyan Marg had the Prime Minister dressed immaculately and looking relaxed. He spoke passionately about the opportunity India has to help address areas of global concern, India as a potential manufacturing hub, and much more. The PM exuded confidence that India was ready for the next phase of economic growth.
आज भारत बड़े लक्ष्य तय कर रहा है.
He listed out the mantras which he felt will power this next wave. Vocal for global, Atmanirbhar Bharat, zero deficit and zero effect among others. Adding that global manufacturers were coming to India, unfolding an era of unprecedented job creation. According to the Prime Minister, domestic consumption remains strong and with every indicator looking up. Economic growth was bound to be strong. With companies like Tesla lining up for an entry into the Indian market and Apple raising its bets on India, the Prime Minister highlighted the effectiveness of the ease of doing business measures taken by the government in the past few years, saying that massive investments by these companies showed the increasing attractiveness of India as a manufacturing destination. Bureau Report, Business Today Television.
In this interview, Prime Minister Modi called for a global framework and regulations for all emerging technologies. Speaking to Business Today in his only interview this year, the Prime Minister said that India's digital public infrastructure was growing in popularity across the world and will go a long way in accelerating global financial inclusion and ease of living.
जी हाँ, आप अपनी स्क्रीन पे देख सकते हैं कि हम लैंडर मॉड्यूल
Landing the Vikram on the dark side of the moon catapulted ISRO into international headlines and made Prime Minister Narendra Modi the toast of the town at the BRICS summit in Johannesburg, South Africa. In the first and only conversation with a media house this year, the Prime Minister revealed to the Business Today team India's plans to use the G20 platform to achieve global targeted welfare delivery. These include the use of the so-called India Stack with services such as Aadhaar, UPI, CoWIN and Jan Dhan Yojana. According to the Prime Minister, India has shown to the world that technology can be a big enabler of ensuring last-mile delivery. Highlighting the fact that 46% of global digital payments were in India, the Prime Minister said that India is viewed by the world today as the incubator of innovation. He claimed that a lot of countries are interested in learning from India's digital public infrastructure experiences, and India has successfully initiated cooperation with at least a dozen nations. Prime Minister Modi also said India is working with G20 countries to accelerate global development by leveraging technology. Prime Minister Modi will be meeting the world's most powerful leaders during the G20 Leadership Summit on the 9th and 10th of September. This includes a second meeting with the US President Joe Biden in 4 months and a second meeting in 3 weeks with Chinese President Xi Jinping. The agenda, apart from politics, will also include talks on emerging technologies like AI and cryptocurrencies. According to the Prime Minister, the focus should be on adoption, democratization, and a unified approach on emerging technologies. At the same time, he adds, regulations and the framework around technologies should not belong to one country or a group of countries. The G20, according to the Prime Minister, has reached a consensus on various crypto agendas and has guided standard-setting bodies accordingly. The Prime Minister in the exclusive chat also pointed out how the world has entered an era of disruptive innovations from an era of incremental change. Highlighting the success of India's startup ecosystem, the Prime Minister said, with around 100,000 startups and 100 unicorns, India is viewed as a hub of startups. India is taking this momentum global and has, during its G20 presidency, set up the Startup 20 Engagement Group. The grouping will act as the voice of the global startup ecosystem, bringing together varied stakeholders on a common platform. What makes G20 so important is that the 20-nation grouping represents around 85% of the global GDP, over 75% of the global trade, and about two-thirds of the world population. India's successful helming of this powerful group will only mean that the momentum of its influence continues even after the baton of presidency is handed to Brazil next. Bureau Report, Business Today Television.
To talk about the Prime Minister's interview to Business Today magazine on the forthcoming G20 Leaders Summit and about the build-up in the capital on the agenda for this massive program that's being held in the capital, we're joined on this broadcast by Sourav Majumdar, editor at Business Today magazine, my colleague Siddharth Zarabi, managing editor at Business Today Television. With us is Geeta Mohan, our executive editor. She tracks foreign affairs for our network. With us, our former colleagues Ashok Malik and Shankar Iyer, both well-known analysts, think tankers and authors. So welcome to all our guests. I want to start by asking Siddharth about the reactions in political circles, in bureaucratic circles, in embassy circles about the interview, where the Prime Minister has really laid out his vision in terms of what he's hoping to get done in September when the Leaders Summit happens in the capital.
Well, we had a great day to get those reactions because it was the Business Today India at 100 Summit and we had a bevy of people come in, including senior government figures. So obviously, the very fact that the Prime Minister has spoken and gone on record, the only interview on the G20 and that to our network and Business Today is fantastic. Two key things stand out. One, the clarity of the vision with regard to the direction of where G20 is supposed to head. G20 was born out of a certain kind of circumstance. The world has now changed and therefore there are obviously fundamental questions on what it is going to do, and clearly it's not a forum for settling feuds of sorts, the kind that we are seeing presently. The second point is in terms of the economic vision, and Rahul, while we can debate about it, I was just going through it, and to me the clear line which stands out again and again, that where the Prime Minister says anything made in India with the sweat of Indians is local. So he is actually redefined a new way of India approaching global trade. We will source components from overseas. We have a PLI, but anything that is touched, created, crafted, assembled, indigenized, packaged by Indian hands with the sweat and toil of Indian workers is made in India, made for the world. So that's the key economic headline that I really take out from it.
Shankar, you've had an opportunity to go through the Prime Minister's interview with Business Today. What stands out to you as the most significant takeaway and the central message that you think the Prime Minister is trying to send to India and the rest of the world?
Well, that's the opening part where the most interesting thing is the clarity on what matters and what doesn't matter. So the opening question on whether this is about economic growth, about India's position in the global GDP order, he's very clear. He says that financial performance, economic performance is what matters, summits don't. And that kind of clarity is very interesting to see from a leader at that stature. The other thing that Rahul, is important to recognize here is that we must look at the arc of history. The G20 came together sort of after the global financial crisis, and many think tankers had actually written it off, calling it G nothing. And now under India's leadership, all the relevant issues are being discussed. There are three major issues that have been brought to attention. One is the role of multilateral agencies, their configuration, their contours. The second is climate change finance. You will remember that it's been 10 years since developed nations had promised $100 billion climate finance, and that is still sort of in the pipeline and it's not happening. And the third is the general role of multilateral, aspect of how countries manage climate change. And how are we going to deal with it? Because this is one of the biggest disruptive forces that will play out, and it's going to cost money. So the world is moving from what I define as insufficient demand to insufficient supply situation. And this holds quite a few challenges for developing economies and also for developed advanced economies.
Okay, Geeta Mohan, we've heard since then that Justin Trudeau is indeed coming. We know that Vladimir Putin will not be coming. The Mexican president hasn't been coming because of various reasons of his own. What's been the reaction that you've picked up from within the embassy circles to the G20 president laying out his vision in terms of what he hopes to get done? Because the one thing that stands out very interestingly as you read between the lines of what the Prime Minister is saying, he's trying to take the attention away from Russia and Ukraine, saying that yes, that's a pressing problem. Yes, there may be no immediate engagement, but in any case, this is an economic forum and there are so many critical issues of the global south, trying to include African Union in the G20, which we want to get done, which has nothing to do with the war that's going on.
Well, going back to what Shankar said, Rahul, the first answer itself is comprehensive. Prime Minister Modi laying out the lay of the land for G20 in India and what the presidency really held. Russia-Ukraine war has been a troubling point for India because a joint communique with the Russia-Ukraine war and the language is going to be difficult. But that's the whole idea. The focus
Are they still attempting it or have they given it up?
They are. The attempt is not to have the language in the manner in which it is, but if there are concerns that countries have, even to do with China, they could all come in the footnotes, which is what the US ambassador told us just 2 days ago, that there will be footnotes in the chairman's summary. So that could be maybe a negotiation.
But no joint communique.
There will be a joint communique, but if the things that are not a part of the joint communique, but the world leaders really want them in, and India wants a certain few things in, which China is objecting to, they could come in the chairman's summary or in the footnotes. So that may be the middle ground that India is looking at and looking for. But the larger perspective, look at the kind of answers he's given. He is talking about the global south. He's talking about inclusivity. He's talking about making India in a better manner, where he's not just saying that you need to come and manufacture in India, but also how people need to realize their dreams through this and work for the planet as well. So it's a comprehensive response to all the G20 questions, all things G20, where he's also focusing on not just make in India and climate, but also focusing on how to get every other country from the global south in.
Ashok Malik, you've been in this government in different positions for a long time. What are you making of the message that the Prime Minister is looking to send just days ahead? Because this interview is being read widely, not just in Indian government and bureaucratic circles, but internationally, because here is the Prime Minister laying out through this Business Today conversation his vision for what he is hoping to get done.
Thank you, Rahul. Thank you for your question. I think the key phrase the Prime Minister used in his opening answer was a phrase he's used through this G20 year and even prior to that, human-centric development. He's variously called it human-centric globalization in other platforms, but he used human-centric development in the interview with Business Today. There's a context to this. G20 was born in 2008 after the global financial crisis, as others have pointed out. The global financial crisis was perhaps the biggest shock to the international economic system since the end of the Cold War. In the last 3 years, we've had 3 shocks. We've had the COVID shock, which has had implications of various varieties. We've had the Ukraine-Russia war, which has also led to shocks in many directions, many geographies. And then we've had the US-China disjunction, the geopolitical shock. Now, if you imagine that these 3 shocks have changed the very nature of discourse in an organization like G20, then Prime Minister Modi has got it spot on. He's recognized that far from being a financial management forum and a talking shop, which is what G20 started off as 15 years ago, G20 has to reinvent itself as central to the developmental challenges and debates of our times, which is the Modi legacy, really. So the concerns of the global south, which he's brought right to the core of G20, because you can't ignore the fact that all three shocks I spoke about, whether it's the implications are in food and energy prices and shortages, whether in climate finance and climate transitions, whether in sustainable debt, or whether in the quest to have an equitable access to digital public infrastructure and related technology. All of these are concerns of the Global South. And the Global South and its developmental challenges and issues and aspirations have to be central to any G20 agenda.
You know, the other thing that stands out as being very interesting is the way we asked this question, Sourav Majumdar, about China and how India seems to be benefiting from a China plus one pivot in global supply chains. He comes out very strong in wanting to position this not as a competitive relationship, not as India benefiting from China's turmoils, but India growing and there being space for other countries to grow because of the efforts they make and whatever it is that they do. He's not seeing this as any kind of a competition. When we mentioned to him, for example, the emergence of India as an economic superpower by 2047, he says, no, that's not the way he sees it. Rather, he's seeing it as India's emergence on its own because of its own actions rather than being at the expense of any country. Sourav, you're on mute.
Yes, absolutely, Rahul. If you remember the first part of our interaction, he was very clear. He actually did not he was not very comfortable with this whole point about India being a superpower or aspiring to be one. What he was essentially saying is let the world develop, let the world grow, let the world go ahead and move forward. We should not, as India, be left behind. That has been his critical point in which he talks about other neighbors also, not just China. He talks about other neighbors. We are obsessing too much about other countries. Let us look at the development of India as a part of the whole global prosperity ecosystem. Now, if you see what the other things he has said, Rahul, I think in this interview, it is a very, very important one because it elevates the whole discourse. I think, as Mr. Malik said, it elevates the whole level of discourse because he is talking about as a global statesman now. He's not talking about just representing one country. He's talking about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. He's talking about including the global South in the entire discussion because global South, he's talking about very eloquently and very passionately about the fact that you cannot have development of the world without the developing countries. You have to include the global South, the developing countries, the poorer countries in the whole discourse. He's also talked about poor and planet as a combination. If you see the interview, he was talking about poor and planet, which is where this whole discussion around the reform of multilateral development banks also comes in. It's all linked in his broader vision, and which is where I found it very, very fascinating the way he was talking to us. It is a broad vision where a lot of these pieces are intertwined with each other for a broader ambition.
You know, we had the opportunity to ask the G20 Sherpa, Amitabh Khan, some questions about the Prime Minister's interview and about India's presidency and what we're hoping to get done in a few days from now when leaders of the 20 most important countries of the world will be descending in the capital. Here is the G20 Sherpa, Amitabh Khan.
We had recently, earlier this week, the privilege of meeting the Prime Minister. The issue is here, which has been unveiled earlier this morning. The Prime Minister spoke extremely eloquently about how he feels this is a great opportunity for India to sort of drive the new world order, sort of be a pivot and ensure that you play a critical role in shaping the new world order. Could you elaborate on some of those aspects where you think this presidency will leave an indelible mark?
So, Sourav, let me first compliment on you on this issue of business today. It's an outstanding issue, very outstanding content, excellent content. And I think you should ensure that everybody reads this issue of business today to understand what G20 is all about. Secondly, if you look at the transformation, there are a couple of trends which are taking place in the world. It's important to understand the paradigm shift that is taking place. One is when G20 started in 2008, the developed world was contributing over about 75% of the global GDP. The developing countries were contributing only about 24, 25%. If you look at it now, the share of the developed world has come down very radically. It's about 55%. The share of the developing countries has increased very substantially. So the share of the developing countries is going up, the share of developing countries is coming down. What is happening is, as the IMF has rightly said, this year 80% of the global growth is going to come from the global south countries. The global south is going to contribute to 80% of the growth. And in the next 2 decades, two-third, and it's quite incredible, 2/3 of the growth is going to come from global south. And this is going to happen because the demographics are in favor of global south. This young population, the population in the western part of the world is aging. And if growth is going to come, all the growth is going to come from global south, then you need greater flow of financial resources for the global south. Unfortunately, the international financial architecture and the multilateral financing institutions which are created post-World War II are not designed for many of these issues. The second trend that is taking place is that there is a movement away from the big tech digitally to models which are open source, open API, interoperable model which allow for greater innovation and allow for private-public play, which India has demonstrated through identity, banking, fast payments, etc. And the third key trend that is taking place is that there is a massive, because of climate action, there's a massive transition taking place in terms of just an inclusive energy transition. So India is at the forefront of all these 3 transitions. We are driving young demographics, we are driving global growth, we are driving digital infrastructure through digital public infrastructure, and we are driving renewable energy, and we are driving green hydrogen, which will replace fossil fuel. So today we import 200 billion worth of fossil fuel. Our aim is to become an exporter of clean energy by 2047. And these 3 trends will really redefine the world of tomorrow.
Over the weekend, we had the big Business 20, the B20 summit in the capital. Siddharth, you were there on quite a few of the days. I had an opportunity to go both on Friday and on Sunday. The kind of energy and effort, not just the government, but also the private sector is making in trying to ensure that there are key recommendations which they're now hoping will get carried forward into the deliberations that happen in early September. So he's activated the whole of the system, it's a whole of government, bringing in the corporates as well approach, rather than just trying to do the bare minimum that is possible. The government really, to the extent that it can, trying to go out of its way to ensure that there is some lasting legacy India's G20 presidency leaves.
Absolutely, and that lasting legacy, there are multiple, including how debt restructuring for some of the poorest nations is happening. But to your broader point, I come back to where we started.
On debt restructuring, is there a possibility that there will be some kind of an announcement in the leaders' summit?
2-3 countries, because earlier only one has happened, 2-3 countries, and the Prime Minister refers to that very clearly. And Rahul, the point that you made, and we need to go back, and other panelists have also spoken about, the G20 started off as a crisis management group. Now today, what do? The Russia-Ukraine crisis outside the ambit of the G20. G20 can't do much about it, and I think it's highly unfair if anyone tries to bring that into a G20, because it's actually an economic forum and not even a multilateral trade forum in that way. So the effort that the Indian government has done and the involvement of businesses, I have seen 4 or 5 B20 summits, been on the ground for several G20 summits, and very clearly I haven't seen this kind of huge involvement of industry and Indian industry. Look at the choice of the main interlocutors from business from the Indian side. The head of Tata Sons, a globally respected Indian conglomerate, has footprints in dozens and dozens of countries. I clearly feel that the industry involvement is also a unique effort and initiative by this government, because that is where some of what we want to achieve overseas in diplomatic terms will get done through private industry, private capital and private initiative.
The other thing that comes out very strong, the pitch the Prime Minister is making, and Nandan Nilekani made the pitch as well, about offering India's digital public infrastructure, services like Aadhaar, UPI, Kovin, Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, and basically making this available as a model. And Sourav, your story actually refers to countries seeming quite excited by the prospects of taking the India stack, and that then becomes a very potent Indian export, which then lies at the heart of the public infrastructure, digital public infrastructure that other countries build on the top of the India stack.
Rahul, that is absolutely correct. I think India's digital stack, the India stack, is a gold standard now, being viewed as such as well by several countries across the world. People are keen to examine it. People are keen to incorporate it in their own economies. And I think the whole issue, which again the Prime Minister in his interview mentioned, that using technology for last mile welfare delivery, I think that's the critical element of the India stack, and also enhancing entrepreneurship, innovation on the back of technology. If you look at UPI, if you look at Aadhaar, the entire gamut of the digital infrastructure which India has so successfully built and continues to be built, like ONDC and other things. I think these are the whole gamut. The India stack is a role model, which is very soon. Mr. Nilekani mentioned it in his speech on the last day of the summit, that India will take it to many other countries over the next 5 years. And I think that is really one of the biggest, gifts, I would say, India can give to the world in terms of even the poorer countries.
How does this work, Ashok Malik? Do we make it available for free? Because Nandan Nilekani mentioned, I was sitting there at the B20 when he said that we hope to give it to 50 countries. We hope to have it activated in 50 countries in 5 years. Do we gift it? How does it work? Like, do they pay us?
No. Look, the point is the digital public infrastructure rollout in different countries will have to be done with different models. India can pass on expertise. India can build the road, as it were. But others can drive on the road as well. So even in India, the private sector has a big role to play in, for example, digital payments or in various aspects of our digital public infrastructure. But, Rahul, I'd like to make a larger point here. Yes, the Prime Minister and the B20 initiative of India is quite right in appreciating that the private sector has a big role to play in B20 or G20 achieving many of its objectives, whether it's climate finance, where private equity and private banks have to play a greater role in lending than they have hitherto, or whether it is in DPI, digital public infrastructure, where private companies also have a role. But what struck me at B20 was that there was a gamut, a galaxy of global business leaders who came for B20. Quite frankly, they didn't come for any B20. They came for India's B20. And this is also a recognition of the appeal of India as a business destination, which, as a result of changes made by the Modi government over the past 5 or 7 years. We have to recognize that if this B20 had been held in another country, it might not have got the sort of response from global business.
But how do you respond to criticism from the likes of P. Chidambaram, who we interviewed at the India 100 Summit, who basically said that there is more noise than actual delivery, that yes, the bells and whistles, the drums can be heard, but the actual numbers don't match with the kind of narrative that is attempting to be said?
There's always scope for improvement, but if you look at FDI numbers in India, they speak for themselves. And even some of the companies you mentioned in Business Today mentioned in this interview, companies like Micron, companies like Tesla, potentially discussing coming to India, companies like Apple bringing more of their supply lines to India, that tells you a story. So I don't want to get into politics here, that's not my remit, but I think there is clearly an appeal that India holds for many companies, for many investors, given that India is likely to contribute 1/5 of global GDP growth in this decade. And,
Siddharth wants to come in to make a point.
Just very quickly, the line, and Ashok, you're absolutely right, the line about Apple has actually been picked up and noticed, not just in India, but overseas, because remember, this is also a time when China is desperately trying to woo back foreign capital, Chinese development, largely on account of US companies, and we have seen what has happened. So I think the fact that the Prime Minister mentioned Apple by name is in itself very significant.
So it's part of the question. The question is about countries
absolutely
like
in response to
Tesla.
Can I just add there? When Aadhaar happened, Rahul, there were countries that actually showed interest from Southeast Asia to have that entire knowledge, to have the data and the wherewithal to have centralized system in their own countries. When the digital payment systems were rolled out or kicked off here in India, there were countries that showed interest. So how is the Indian administration going to work? They're going to work either G2G or G2B, which is if the country, particularly I'm saying Southeast Asia, because India is a leading voice and a leading face when it comes to digital technology. Manufacturing, we are yet to get there, but in this space, we actually rule. So Southeast Asian countries, depending on what their structure of government is how India is going to deal with those countries, either G2G or it could be G2B.
The other thing that stood out as important to me is the fact that the president of the World Economic Forum, Borge Brande, in an interview I did with him, refers to the emergence of a G3. Remember, the last several years have been about G2, the United States and China. He says in the next 10 years, India will be a $10 trillion economy and the global order will be defined by the G3. So let me just play out a quick excerpt of what the WEF president told us, and then we'll go across the panel and get their sense on whether this is the inevitable way forward or is this more hype. Listen in. India this year is the president of the G20. And Prime Minister Modi will be hosting the Big Leaders Summit in early September. How do you see India's presidency? PM Modi has just given Business Today an exhaustive interview, his first on the G20, where he sees the G20 emerge as a catalyst for a new global order. And there's a lot of talk about emerging as a leader of the global south. How do you see India's efforts at trying to be a catalyst in establishing a new global order?
It is true that there is a new order, but there are fundamental economic changes going on, and that we do know. So the economists at the World Economic Forum also definitely are saying that India will become the third largest economy in the world in a couple of years. So you're bypassing Germany and Japan, and it will be then the US, China, the so-called G2. But my prediction, and I coined this for you here today, I think in a decade we will be faced with a G3.
Wow, that's interesting. Can we have a round of applause, please?
And
this is the first time I'm hearing of G3.
Yeah, the G3 is the US, China, and India. And that is a new reality. So far, India has not really leveraged its strength in the global geopolitics. India has been a little bit shy about that. I think what Prime Minister Modi is showing now is that India will also play a more important role when it comes to shaping the new order.
Okay, so this is an outside-in voice looking at the India story in a global context. Ashok Malik, your first reaction on this construct of a G3? I mean, as an Indian, it instinctively warms and gladdens my heart. But I also know from experience in history that nothing can be taken for granted, and 10 years is an incredibly long time in global politics.
That is true. And quite frankly, if you heard the Prime Minister's Independence Day speech, and even in other speeches, he is trying to caution India against premature celebration. He's talking about a period of a multi-year, multi-term, multi-decade period of very hard striving and work. We've made huge progress in the past 10 years, especially in infrastructure, in logistics, to try and make India much more appealing to business, both Indian business and global business. But we will have to continue striving. We should guard against premature celebration. The world is ripe for India's rise. the geopolitical and geo-economic currents are intersecting in our favor, but we have to keep striving. Continuity, predictability, and stability at home is very, very important.
Shankar Iyer, this idea of a G3, the manner in which the WEF president says it and he travels internationally, the institute studies everything that's happening in India and globally, and they think that that's the trajectory over the next 10 years.
Well, he's not saying something surprising, Rahul. The BRICS report, which came out in 2000, said that India would be the third largest. Over the last 10 years, the CEBR in UK has said it, and a number of economists have laid this out based on the trajectory.
No, but this is not just about the size of the economy. It's a mix of the size of the economy, the country's comprehensive national power, the ability to leverage its population, its people, its demography, its size in a geopolitical context.
So that's true. What is interesting here is the framing of the point that several economists and others have made over the past 2 decades. The framing of G3, however, is not exactly the framing that Mr. Modi wants to have. His entire framing of how India is placed, whether it is vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis other countries, is very simple, is that the G20 was formed after the global financial crisis. The world is facing a series of crises. Now, after the global financial crisis, the world came together by the formation of G20. Now the G20 is trying to bring together a very divided world. And so he's using all the aspects of diplomacy, economy, politics to bring that together, which is what needs to be appreciated in the G20 summit. What is the role of digital infrastructure? The digital role of infrastructure is to enable countries in Africa and other developing countries to deliver on time, efficiently and without corruption. What is the role of the multilateral agencies to be able to deliver credit on time? How do we make that happen is to change the voting pattern in those institutions. What is the issue with debt relief is China is holding number of countries to ransom, if I may say so, or in a difficult, puts the multilateral agencies in a difficult position. So debt relief is important. How will India reach its target of being the third largest and then move further ahead? Is how does the world tackle the challenges of climate change, technology, and of course demography? So this is a complete package, and the framing of G3, frankly, is very nice to hear, Rahul. As you said, all Indians, all of us like to hear that, but we know that India is headed that way. What is important for India is to figure out the pathway, not to sort of get carried away. So the point that the Prime Minister makes in his interview, he's so cautious. The first question, again, I'm saying that it's a very candid and very thoughtful answer.
Okay. Geeta, what's the thinking among other embassies at this moment building up to the G20 summit? We haven't seen an official confirmation from Xi Jinping just yet. And I just want to tell our viewers that typically these confirmations come in just ahead of the summit. We've seen Trudeau confirm, we saw Putin decline. So this kind of happens just a few days ahead. So over the next few days, we'll see that out. Is she coming?
Well, it's unlikely that she will not come.
But he also seems to be suffering from some kind of ill health?
There is no way that Xi Jinping will miss a G20 because it is a show of strength, and you've seen him.
But it's a show of Indian strength. How's the show of his strength?
When he comes and the statements he makes, look at the kind of meetings he gets, look at on the sidelines, the meetings that he does. We'll have to wait and see what is in plan for Xi Jinping when it comes to the sideline meetings. So it is going to be very important, unlikely that Xi Jinping will not come.
We know that the Saudi Arabian prince will be doing a state visit the day after the G20 gets over.
Yes.
Will there be a state visit prior? Would somebody like a Biden be doing a state visit prior?
So again, the US Ambassador Rahul confirmed to us that there is going to be not just a visit, but also the fact that they're trying to plan something as big as the state visit that was planned for Prime Minister Modi. Now, he's
On
not
the
detailed
sidelines of
on the
this.
sidelines, so we don't know exactly.
So he comes a day early or something. But he can't spend 3 or 4, 5 days.
No, he's not going to spend 3 or 4 days. But whatever the event will be on the sidelines is going to be quite big, and there are going to be special gestures. Let's wait and see who all Prime Minister Modi.
Where did they go? There's supposed to be a cultural jamboree as well.
Everything is going to be at the G20 venue.
No, so they're not going to some place nearby or something.
No, right now. It's all under wraps, if at all they're doing that, but they're keeping it very confined to the G20 venue. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult for movement around Delhi. All hotels from Gurgaon to Noida.
In Indonesia, they went somewhere, right?
It was in Bali. The forest that they went to, the tropical forest that they went to, was in Bali. So it was not out of Bali. It was, yes, but out of the venue.
Yeah, but there's an expectation in the past, at least, that there is some kind of a side event where there's like an opportunity to bond and mingle.
I'm sure it'll have to do with climate change, planting of trees, things like that, where there's a lot of messaging. This is Prime Minister Modi's baby when it comes to how he's taken climate change as one of his very important and dear subjects. So certainly around those lines.
I want to end this over here and thank our guests for joining us and essentially just say this, that India Today will cover the G20 summit as best as we possibly can. We'll go deep, we'll go wide, we'll go high to give you a perspective of what's happening, the issues at play, because it's much more than just the photo opportunity. The photo opportunity and the breathless commentary around the shake hands, the smiles, the hugs or the jappies or whatever else is just one part of it. Ultimately, there's a solid agenda. We've tried to cover that agenda. We'll do so in the days to come. The Prime Minister talks about a new global order. So here's a man who doesn't think or act small. You know, he's thinking big. Initially, it may seem a bit outrageous when he says some of these things, but a few years later, as the wheels move and as things happen in India and internationally, coincidentally, they don't seem so outrageous. The idea of a G3 may not be as inconceivable as it was a few years ago, but there can be many a slip between the cup and the lip. So we'll track what happens very, very closely. For the time being, Shankar Iyer, Ashok Malik, thank you for joining us. Geeta and her team will be extremely busy in the days to come. Sourav and Siddharth, once again, congratulations on scooping the Prime Minister's interview. We'll slip into a break. I'll have more for you when we come back on the other side. Home Minister Amit Shah enters the state of war in Telangana, says the Congress, the BRS and the AIMIM are 4G, 3G and 2G of Indian politics. Details on the other side.
Once again, India Today wins Best Channel of the Year.
Thank you very much, viewers, for making the India Today group the most awarded TV news network at the ENVA Awards 2023.
State of Madhya Pradesh, from where a shocking incident has come to light, this time from the Sagar district in the state. An 18-year-old Dalit man has been beaten to death, his mother stripped naked in broad daylight. Now, according to the police, the victim's sister in 2019 had filed a sexual harassment case against some of the accused. They turned up at the victim's house on Thursday, urged her and her mother to withdraw the case. When the victim said that they will not take the case back, the accused then assaulted her, her brother, who's 18 years old, with sticks. He was then taken to the hospital where the doctors declared him dead. 8 people have been arrested so far. Several others at the moment are absconding. The matter is under investigation. There's also a lot of politics that is now taking place over this incident. The BSP and the Congress have slammed the Bharatiya Janata Party government. They are saying that these atrocities against the Dalits are at an all-time high under Shivraj Singh's government. This is what the BSP is saying. The Congress, on the other side, is accusing the state government of ignoring the Dalit oppression that's taking place in the state.
विक्रम सिंह ठाकुर और कोमल सिंह ठाकुर और राजकुमार सिंह और अंकित और आज़ाद सिंह ठाकुर, इन लोगों ने, ये लोग मैन हैं, इन लोगों ने मेरे भाई का मर्डर कर दिया। कोमल सिंह ठाकुर ने माँ की साड़ी निकाल ली, फिर उसके बाद माँ के पूरे कपड़े उतार दिए, फिर उसके बाद कुछ नहीं, फिर वो सारे भाग गए, बोले कि वीडियो बनाएगी, वीडियो बना रहा होगा कोई। फिर उसके बाद पुलिस आई तो मेरी माँ भाई को लिए थी, तो वो तो बेहोश पड़ा हुआ था। तो जैसे ही हम लोग यहाँ पे आए, खुरई आए, तो खुरई में हम लोग हॉस्पिटल लेके आए, तो हॉस्पिटल में मना कर दिया, उन्होंने बोले कि लेके जाओ, रेफ़र कर दिया सागर, और सागर रास्ते में उसकी डेथ हो गई।
पीट के हमारे कपड़ा उतार देते सब। फिर पुलिस वाले आ गए तो उनकी नज़र पड़ी, तो फिर वे टावल ले आए, फिर टावल लपेट के हम खड़े रहे, तो फिर भी साड़ी लेके आए।
लालू उर्फ नितिन अहिरवार, उसके साथ में जो है कुछ लोगों ने मारपीट की थी, जिस पर से जो है अज्ञात लोग 9 लोग ज्ञात लोग और 3-4 अन्य अज्ञात लोगों के खिलाफ 307 का मामला कायम हुआ था और इलाज के लिए लेकर के आ रहे थे सागर अस्पताल। इस दौरान जो है उसकी मृत्यु हो गई थी, तो धारा 302 और SC/ST एक्ट भी जो है उसमें जुड़ गया है। उसमें जो है हम लोगों ने अभी तक जो 13 आरोपी थे उनमें
You're on board the Newstrack. The stage is set for the big Telangana takkar. The Home Minister has launched a fierce attack on the Congress and the BRS, accusing them of furthering their families. Amit Shah has declared that there will be a saffron sweep in Telangana.
The fight for Telangana has kicked off. The BRS, BJP and Congress, the three contenders have pulled out their big guns as poll fever builds up in the state. The BJP, which sees Telangana as potential growth area after the debacle in Karnataka, is gunning for K. Chandrasekhar Rao big time. Union Home Minister Amit Shah lashed out against dynastic politics at a rally in Khammam on Sunday.
एक कांग्रेस पार्टी 4G पार्टी है। 4G मतलब जवाहरलाल जी, इंदिरा जी, राजीव जी और अब राहुल गांधी। 4 जनरेशन पार्टी। केसीआर की पार्टी 2G पार्टी है। केसीआर बाद में केटीआर और ओवैसी की पार्टी 3G पार्टी है। 3 पीढ़ियों से ये भी चल रही है।
The ruling BRS, facing the twin challenge by the BJP and Congress, is highlighting welfare schemes implemented by the KCR government.
ఈ రెండింటిని చూస్తూ ఉంటే నిజంగా తెలంగాణలో ఎన్నికలు వస్తున్నటువంటి సందర్భంలో లేనిపోని కళ్ళబొల్లి మాటలు చెప్పి ప్రజలను పక్కదోవ పట్టించేటటువంటి ప్రయత్నం విపరీతంగా ప్రతిపక్షాలు చేస్తున్నట్టుగా మనకు అర్థమవుతూ ఉన్నది. వాస్తవానికి ఆలోచన చేసినట్టయితే భారతదేశంలో అత్యధిక సంవత్సరాలు అధికారంలో ఉన్నటువంటిది కాంగ్రెస్ పార్టీ. అయినప్పటికీ దళితులను మరి ఎప్పుడు కూడా వాళ్ళు గరీబీ రేఖ కిందనే ఉంచిరు కానీ పైకైతే తీసుకొచ్చినటువంటి పాపాన పోలేదు.
The Congress, eyeing a revival in the state, is calling KCR the B team of BJP.
केसीआर पार्टी का उनका दोस्ती हो गया है अंदर से, और अंदर से जब दोस्ती होती है जोर से बोल नहीं सकता आदमी। अब देखेंगे, अब इधर इधर तो बोलना भी बंद हुआ, ऐसा मैं सुना केसीआर का। केसीआर के साथ ओवैसी बैठे हैं और मैं बताने आया हूं तेलंगाना की जनता को, भारतीय जनता पार्टी कुछ भी हो जाए ओवैसी और केसीआर के साथ कभी नहीं जाएगी। केसीआर के खिलाफ हम लड़ेंगे।
Assembly elections are scheduled in Telangana later this year. The ruling BRS is first off the block, having announced its candidate list even as the election dates are still awaited. Telangana this time is witnessing a tough three-horse race. With the opposition vote getting split, KCR's party hopes to survive anti-incumbency yet again. Bureau Report, India Today.
This is where we wrap up the Newstrack tonight. For your time and your trust, thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you 8 p.m. tomorrow evening. Till then, from all of us here, goodbye, good night.